Hello, everyone. So lovely to see all of you. It just makes me happy every time I get up here and I see everybody's faces. So I'm really glad that we get to spend time like this together every week. So my message is God works in mysterious ways. And what more of a mysterious way for God to work than the circumstances around the birth of Jesus? You know, we very much romanticize the circumstances of Jesus' conception and birth, when in reality at that time, no one would have been envious of Jesus' conception or birth or life. You know, it was harshly judged. From the world's perspective at that time, Jesus was an illegitimate child. And not only was that something that was looked down upon, it was something Mary could have been killed for. Joseph put his reputation on the line and said that the baby was his to protect Mary, even though that meant telling the world that they had had a relationship out of wedlock. So he already destroyed his own reputation in protecting her. And everybody who knew Jesus' family at that time were like, wow, they screwed it up. You know, there's no future for this couple. There's no future for that baby. There's no future for that family. Everybody knew it. You know, that's why there was no room in Bethlehem for Joseph and Mary when they went for the census at the time of Jesus' birth. Bethlehem was not like a bustling city. It wasn't New York. It wasn't Denver. Even today, Bethlehem has a population of about 25,000. I live an hour away from a town that has about 25,000 in Missouri. I grew up about an hour away from a town with 25,000 people. And even in that town that I didn't grow up in, I would run into people I knew all the time at Walmart, grocery store, movie theater. But back then, the estimates are Bethlehem was maybe 300 to 600 people. And that was Joseph's hometown. I also didn't grow up in a hometown. My hometown was 20 minutes away. And was 1,500 people, and I know everybody there. So I guarantee you, Joseph knew plenty of people in Bethlehem. He was related to plenty of people in Bethlehem. But the way that we kind of portray it these days, it's like, oh, there was no space in Bethlehem. The inns were all full. Nobody had an extra room. No. If you're family, don't you make room for family? There was room, but there was nobody who was willing to be the people who took in this screwed up, messed up couple who ruined their life and their illegitimate baby. They didn't want to have that happen in their house. So that was the circumstances of Jesus' birth. It's not the way people expect God to work, right? But God works in mysterious ways. And that's often exactly how God works, not in the way that we would maybe hope or expect or want. Even though Jesus was exactly who the people of the time were waiting for. There were all these prophecies, all these predictions, all of these writings in Scripture about how the Messiah was going to come, and he was exactly who they were waiting for. But because of expectations of how it would be, most of the people completely missed it. And I think about ourselves sometimes. Aren't we like that sometimes? We think things should go a certain way according to our logic, according to our experiences, according to what we think is right. But many times it's not necessarily that things don't go the way we expect, but it's that we're so focused on what we wanted it to be that we miss how God was working in a mysterious way. So this reminds me of this quote from Isaiah. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Isn't that humbling? It's so hard for us as people living and experiencing out of this body to separate or to let go of myself as being the center of the universe. You know, we see, sometimes we can make fun of people who seem really selfish, or kids, really obviously they seem like they're the center of the universe, but in reality, most of the time we still think of ourselves as the center of the universe. But God is reminding us that is not the case. But it also can be comforting to think that I don't have to have it all figured out if I can keep my eyes on God. Actually, the Bible is completely full of stories of God working in mysterious ways that nobody expects. Story of Noah. People don't expect that the crazy old man who was been building a boat on the top of a mountain for most of his life was actually guided by God, did serve an important purpose in the history of the whole world. People didn't expect that Moses, who spoke with a stutter, to be the one who actually received the Ten Commandments, God's actual word, right? The person who could speak the worst was the one who was actually the receiver and giver of God's word to the people directly. I think about the story of Jacob and Esau and how Jacob convinced his brother to give him the birthright, right? To give him the inheritance, the blessing of the family, and tricked his father into giving it to him. But then it was like everything fell apart. He had to run away from home. He spent 21 years in servitude to his uncle, got tricked into marrying the wrong wife. You know, if I would think of myself in that situation, I think it'd be very easy to be very wrapped up in how unfair it all is, and how, I had such a good thing going, and then it all just fell apart. It would be very easy to be sucked into resentment, right, towards his brother, resentment towards his uncle. It's easy for us to focus on things like, life shouldn't be like this. It was all set up to work like this, and now it's not. It shouldn't be like this. Or I've been wronged by people. It's very easy when we feel like we've been betrayed or wronged to just get sucked into that feeling. And that's all we can see and all we can feel. And yet, the amazing part about Jacob's story was that, I'm sure that he wasn't immune from those feelings. I'm sure that he was frustrated that things didn't work out the way that he wanted. I'm sure that he knew that he was being taken advantage of by his uncle. But at the same time, somehow he didn't lose sight of his vision, or the thought that God is here and God is working, because without that, there would have been no way for him to embrace his brother 21 years later, right? So there was some kind of an attitude that he maintained, or gratitude, or perspective. So the Bible, oh my gosh, I feel like every story in the Bible, there's no story in the Bible where it's like, this happened exactly as it was foretold. This was exactly according to plan, and there were no mistakes. No. And God especially doesn't necessarily work towards our expectations. God uses whatever circumstances are available, and especially whichever people are open to Him. Many times we find that the people who actually succeeded in the Bible, the people who God worked with, the people who became Jesus' disciples, they were not necessarily the best people by society's expectations or standards. Many times they were less educated. They were very humble. But they were people with a heart that was seeking God despite circumstances and others' opinions. So then taking that and looking at our own lives, we have goals and expectations for our lives, which is not a bad thing, right? We should. But sometimes we're so attached to how we think things should turn out, or the process of it should go like this, that we fail to see what from God's perspective, God's ways, God's thoughts. It's easy for us to be so caught up in what I'm thinking and what I'm experiencing that we fail to see what God is trying to do with us in our circumstances right now. Or we completely dismiss it at all and we say, I'm nobody. God, what does God care about me? I'm just one person. And at the end of the year, I know for myself, I'm like, isn't it 2021 still? Oh no, it's almost 2023. Like, where did this year go? But since Thanksgiving, I've kind of been like, okay, this is almost the end of the year, trying to look back on the year, trying to reflect on what happened, what my experiences were, what was challenging, what was God guiding me in. And I don't know how it is for you, but you might be looking back and considering your experiences with varying degrees of satisfaction or dissatisfaction, or fulfillment, or maybe disappointment. I feel like the end of the year is always a little bit confronting to us. Yeah. But I want to remind you from Romans 8:28, we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. I know for myself that God just keeps leading me in ways that I never expected myself to go. First of all, I married this very technologically savvy person who at the time had never really taken a walk in nature. And I would never have guessed that. And if I had just done things according to the way that I thought that they should happen, it wouldn't have led me to Mike. I became pregnant with twins. And even though genetics and everything, if I had looked into it, probably would have told me I would have had twins, I was completely oblivious. And I thought, well, if I'm going to have twins, please let it be twin girls, or at least a boy and a girl. I didn't know what a blessing twin boys was, so that's a way God was guiding me, contrary to my expectations. I remember when Mike's dad first called Mike and suggested the idea of us becoming pastors. I think Mike handled it very well. I was like, I actually said something else that I won't repeat at the pulpit. But it was the last thing on my mind that I wanted to do. And yet, what a blessing it has been. And here we've started a school. Also, like second to last thing on my list of things that I thought I would never do. I really didn't enjoy. I was good at school, but I didn't enjoy school. I didn't enjoy the educational system. It's not something I ever was excited to work in. And yet, here I am. And what a blessing it's been for me and my family. So these are ways that I feel God has guided me, contrary to my own expectations or thoughts about how things should go. And these are things that have really, really been blessings. But also, along the way, and I'm sure you can look on your own life and find similar things where you don't quite know how that was a blessing. Things didn't work out the way that you thought, and it's hard to see it as a positive. I can also think of many experiences along this whole path that didn't feel like blessings at all. And if I dwelled on them, probably could have derailed me early on. I would never have gotten to the point where I could have experienced an awesome marriage or having beautiful twin boys or becoming a pastor or starting a school. So this is a quote from Reverend Moon about God. He is ready to help me, and he is helping you already. But if you are without faith in him, he cannot do anything. You must take the initiative to become one with God. Wherever you go with him. Whatever you seek with him. When you sleep, when you work, when you eat, you must feel that you are doing those things with God. If you go on doing things that way, then you will feel the presence of God and feel the hearts of people with you. You sense the power and presence of God. So what I get from this is that when God is doing something in our life, it might not look like God is doing something in our life. And if we're not open to it, or we're just focused on ourselves, we can miss it entirely. But if we can be mindful of God and his purpose, then we can be open to how God might be working through these circumstances, rather than just rejecting things because they don't fit my ideas or my plan. So at this time, as we're reflecting on Jesus' birth, what looked like an absolute disaster, an absolute mess, a mistake, a dead end. Of course, with hindsight, we can see that it was God's biggest gift to the world. It was a blessing to us. And that was an expression of God's love. And that same God and that same love for us is not different today than it was 2,000 years ago. So, in our own lives, I think, with hindsight, we now look back and we see how God worked to prepare Jesus' lineage and to bring him to the earth and to lay the foundation for spiritual salvation for all people. And because of that, then we can sing songs like Away in a Manger, and we can sing Joy to the World, and we can have this perspective, right, with hindsight. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we could take our circumstances that we're in right now, and instead of at the end of our life looking back and like, oh, maybe God was trying to teach me something there, we can pause and say, what is God trying to do right now? Because that same God and that same love that brought Jesus is not different for us today. And as much as we think of ourselves sometimes as insignificant, unimportant to God's purpose, each one of us is important to God's purpose. So I guarantee you, God is working in your life right now. Our challenge is to believe it and to be open to it, to not reject it because it might be difficult right now. If we keep our hearts open to God, we keep an attitude of gratitude, then God can use that to guide us in the right direction. I feel like that is really our challenge in our life of faith, isn't it? It's not something we can just say, oh yes, I'll do that. And we decide to do it, and then we've done it, and then the rest of the life we've succeeded. Right? It's something that we are always challenged with every day and in all the experiences that we have. But at the same time, doesn't that keep our relationship with God fresh? We might just wish, I wish I could just have faith and then not have to stress anymore. But in some ways, because we face challenges frequently, it reminds us that we need to go to God frequently. And it can renew our relationship with God. So my message isn't long today, but I do really think it's worth considering and remembering how Jesus was brought to this world and how all of history has progressed like this, all the stories in the Bible, from the perspective of the people at the time, or from our own eyes of judgment of what seems right or wrong. It was a mess. Like the whole thing is just a mess. And yet God worked through all of those circumstances. So maybe right now you might feel like, my life is a mess. It's just a mess. And I think sometimes we can look at people who we feel like are struggling, or maybe they've already passed and we feel like their lives were a mess. So maybe that's what's going to happen to me. But God gives us free will, and I think God is never just done with us. God is never like, you are past the point of no return. There's no hope for you. I feel like there's always a point where if we humble ourselves to God and offer ourselves to God, that God can use wherever we're at and whatever circumstances to turn it for good and for blessings. So that's my Christmas reflection, and please join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Parent, thank you so much for being with us today and throughout this year and throughout our lives up to this point. Heavenly Parent, I think that sometimes we can look back on our lives and see from your perspective and be filled with gratitude for your guidance and your love and your protection up to this point. And that there are also times when we look back and we feel that we are too far off the path, or we are not where we wanted to be, and it's easy to have feelings of regret or shame or frustration. Heavenly Parent, We know that you are not the only force in this world, and there are forces of evil. But more than evil circumstances or bad things, evil wants to work in our hearts and sow dissatisfaction and sow resentment and sow frustration and blame. Heavenly Parent, that is where the real battle is fought, is in our hearts, and how we digest the experiences of our life, and whether we can offer them to you or whether we get consumed by our frustrations and then multiply that outwards, Heavenly Parent. So I pray that as we finish up this year and as we reflect on our experiences, that more than thinking about the actual things that happened this year, we can look into our hearts and examine how we are going to digest them and how we're going to offer it to you and use it as a catalyst for good in the coming year. We thank you so much for your love for us throughout our life, but even throughout the decades and the centuries and the millennia, as you've been working through our ancestors and been working through central figures like Jesus and Moses and Jacob, Heavenly Parent. Your love for us is evident in all of the stories of the Bible, in all the experiences of our life, if we choose to see it, Heavenly Parent. Thank you so much. We offer this time to you, and I pray this in my name, Michael and Adonia Hentrick of Blessed Central Family. Amen and adieu. Okay, thank you.